Welcome to Season 12 of the 5-Minute Biographies podcast. Here is your host, Wayne Armstrong.
Hi guys, welcome to 5-Minute Biographies. Before we get started, just a quick reminder to check out the YouTube channel at 5minutebiographies.com/YouTube. And don't forget you can listen to 5-Minute Biographies in Spanish at 5minutebiographies.com/Spanish. You may notice that there's no advertising on this podcast, so if you'd like to show your support by, say, buying me a coffee, head on over to 5minutebiographies.com/coffee to see how. Finally, I'd just like to let you know that we now have an Instagram account where we'll keep you up to date with what's going on with us, so please follow us at 5minutebiographies.com/Instagram. Okay, so that's enough of that. Let's get on with episode 5 of season 12, Vivien Leigh. The British actress known as Vivien Leigh was born in Darjeeling, in what was then British India, on the 5th of November 1913. She was the only child of Ernest Richard Hadley, a Scottish-born broker, and his wife Gertrude Mary Frances, a devout Roman Catholic who was born in Darjeeling. When Vivien was nearly 4 years old, her father was appointed as an officer in the Indian cavalry and was transferred to Bangalore, whilst Vivien and her mother stayed behind in Ooty, a hill station in the Nilgiri Hills, where Gertrude was involved in an amateur theatre group. Her daughter's first taste of performing on stage came about during this time, when she recited Little Bo Peep for the group. By the time she was 6, Vivien and her family had started moving around different places in Europe, and so she attended various schools in France and Italy, becoming fluent in the languages of both countries. In 1931, the family returned to Europe and Vivien saw the film A Connecticut Yankee, after which she expressed a desire to become an actress, so her father enrolled her at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, or RADA. In the same year, Vivien, who was now 17 years old, met a barrister, 13 years her senior, called Lee Holman, and the couple married on the 20th of December 1932, even though he had expressed that he didn't approve of theatre types, which prompted her to call a halt to her studies at RADA. The following year, on the 12th of October, Vivien gave birth to a daughter called Suzanne. Although she was no longer studying at RADA, her friends knew of her interest in acting and persuaded her to take on a role as a schoolgirl in the film Things Are Looking Up. She was an uncredited extra, but playing the part prompted her to get an agent, John Glidden, which led her to being cast in a play called The Mask of Virtue. Glidden also said that Vivien Holman wasn't a great name for an actress, and after rejecting several suggestions, she settled on Vivien Leigh, with the spelling of her first name being altered by accident to Vivien with an E in the billing for the play. As fortune would have it, in late 1935 she made the acquaintance of Laurence Olivier, who had seen The Mask of Virtue and congratulated her on her performance. In 1937, Leigh and Olivier played the parts of lovers in the film Fire Over England, and the pair began an affair. At the same time, Vivien had been reading the book Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell, and she instructed her agent to put her name forward to David O. Selznick, who was planning to make a film based on the book. Leigh even remarked to a journalist that she was hoping to get the part of Scarlett O'Hara. In the meantime, she starred opposite Olivier again. This time it was in Denmark in a production of Hamlet, during which Vivien started screaming at Olivier for no apparent reason, before becoming silent and going on to perform without a problem. It was the first time that such behaviour had been witnessed by Olivier, with whom Leigh was now living, even though neither had been granted a divorce by their partners, but it wouldn't be the last, as Vivien soon started to develop a reputation for erratic behaviour and for being difficult to work with. In 1939, Laurence Olivier travelled to the United States to take the part of Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights, to broaden his appeal and hopefully become better known to US audiences. Vivien was offered a part in the film, but as it wasn't the lead part of Cathy, she refused. At the same time, David O. Selznick had started to look seriously for someone to play the part of Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, but he had already discounted Vivien for being too British after having seen her performance in Fire Over England. Leigh wasn't going to take no for an answer though, and travelled to Los Angeles to see Olivier, and at the same time try to convince Selznick that she would indeed make a good Scarlett. After an encounter was engineered by Selznick's brother, Myron, Leigh read a scene for him and then secured a screen test with the director George Cukor, the result of which was Vivien Leigh being chosen for the part over the other three potentials, Paulette Goddard, Jean Arthur and Joan Bennett. Leigh found the experience of filming Gone with the Wind difficult, especially after Cukor had been dismissed and replaced with Victor Fleming. However, in a 2006 biography, Olivia de Havilland stated that Leigh was never manic or ill-disciplined, but was a true professional, with only two concerns, one of which was doing her best work, and the other of which was missing Laurence Olivier, who was working in New York City. Gone with the Wind won 10 Academy Awards, including Best Actress for Vivien Leigh, and she became an instant star. In February 1940, both Olivier and Leigh were granted divorces, and on the 31st of August that year, the couple were married in California. They hoped that this would be the start of a big joint career, but the powers that be stopped that from happening, refusing to let them work together on projects such as Alfred Hitchcock's Rebecca, Pride and Prejudice and Waterloo Bridge. And when the couple mounted their own stage production of Romeo and Juliet on Broadway, the press and critics were openly hostile, citing the adulterous nature of their early relationship and their apparent lack of support for the war effort. This resulted in the show being a flop and was a financial disaster for Leigh and Olivier, as they had put most of their own combined savings of $40,000 into the project. They took the criticism on board, though, and returned to Britain to support the war effort, with Leigh touring Africa in 1943 as part of a review for the armed forces. In 1944 she fell ill with tuberculosis but seemed to make a full recovery. In 1945, whilst filming Caesar and Cleopatra, she fell pregnant but suffered a miscarriage, resulting in her falling into a deep depression. She would sometimes throw hysterical fits, and Olivier noticed a pattern of several days of hyperactivity, followed by depression and then a major breakdown that would alert him to an impending bipolar episode. Afterwards, Leigh would have no recollection of any of it. Although their films at this time were not great successes, not the least reason for which was the Hollywood boycott of British films, Laurence Olivier was knighted in 1947, with Vivien Leigh becoming Lady Olivier. Vivien Leigh's next role was to be a masterpiece. Initially cast in the West End stage production of A Streetcar Named Desire in the role of Blanche Dubois, with Laurence Olivier, who was now on the board of the Old Vic Theatre, directing, she gave 326 performances, resulting in Noel Coward calling her magnificent, before moving on to the film version in which she starred opposite Marlon Brando. The film version resulted in her second Academy Award for Best Actress, as well as a British Academy of Film and Television Arts Award for Best British Actress. However, although Leigh's performance won her glowing reviews, the work had been gruelling, and in later years she said that playing the part of Blanche Dubois was what ultimately drove her to madness. During the 1950s, Vivien Leigh's mental health deteriorated. In 1953 she started filming Elephant Walk in Ceylon with Peter Finch, with whom she started an affair. However, she had a nervous breakdown and Paramount replaced her with Elizabeth Taylor. Olivier brought her home to London and she confessed to the affair, but that fizzled out as a result of her depression. Whilst in London, her friends became aware of her manic depression, with David Niven at one point describing her as quite mad. In 1956 she became pregnant but suffered another miscarriage, following which she entered into another period of depression. Her marriage was also now starting to suffer, and believing it to be over, she started another affair, this time with actor Jack Merivale. In 1960, Laurence Olivier and Vivien Leigh divorced, with him going on to marry Joan Plowright. Merivale proved to be a calming influence, enabling Leigh to embark on a successful tour of Australia, New Zealand and Latin America, and in 1963 she won a Tony Award for Best Actress in a Musical for her part in Tovarish. She also starred in the films The Roman Spring of Mrs. Stone and 1965's Ship of Fools, which turned out to be her last. Following several weeks of rest from filming A Delicate Balance with Michael Redgrave in May 1967, during which Vivien Leigh's tuberculosis resurfaced, she seemed to have been recovering, but during the very early hours of 8th of July, Jack Merivale found her on the floor of her bedroom. It seemed that she had attempted to get to the bathroom, but her lungs filled up with liquid, resulting in her collapsing on the floor where she suffocated. Vivien Leigh's death at the age of only 53 was announced to the public later that day, and in response, the lights of every theatre in central London were turned off for an hour. I hope you enjoyed that episode of 5 Minute Biographies. If you did, why not show your support by, say, buying me a coffee? Head on over to 5minutebiographies.com/coffee to see how. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, and please check out the YouTube channel at 5minutebiographies.com/YouTube. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the 5 Minute Biographies podcast at www.5minutebiographies.com.